Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, Maura, and thank you for having me. Leap ladies, am I allowed to call you that? So this is nice for me, and one of the benefits of the pandemic has been that I'm able to join people for presentations that maybe folks would have not considered me, because I'm in France right now, and so the ability to be able to join you from across the ocean is exciting, and I really appreciate it. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, but I do want to say that, as Maura said, the island of Ireland holds a very special place in my heart. Like many Americans, my family was originally from there, from Malin, and came over several generations ago. My great-grandmother came over when she was a teenager, and I've since returned. So I went back over to Dublin, and then also to Belfast, and it's some of the most special time of my life. And so I'm delighted to be able to join you guys today. So I'm going to now share my screen, hopefully, fingers crossed that it works, and jump into the presentation. I'll try to keep it maybe about 15-20 minutes, and then what I really want to do is just have a conversation. I'd love it if you all had any questions, or if we could just talk a bit about sort of how you're experiencing this time, and maybe have that be a trigger for a bit of a discussion. So let me try to do this successfully. And are you all seeing a screen that says the new abnormal leading in a strange global landscape?
Yes, looks great.
Yes.
Yay! So let me start with why I'm calling it the new abnormal. I chafed about 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, when I was seeing all these things coming out about the new normal, the new normal. And I think there's a real risk in normalizing what is happening right now. I think there is a risk in calling a pandemic a normal time. I appreciate that people are rushing to try to get to a place where it feels natural again. But I think we have to recognize that when people are still in the hospital and dying, when people have been are separated still from their families and friends, when they're homeschooling kids, when they didn't do that before, when even our rights of movement have been taken away, this is not normal. And sometimes to even call it that is maybe dangerous in some ways, to normalize having all these changes happen, to have so much autonomy taken away from us. But I also think that it just lacks empathy sometimes for those of us that are able to quickly get back to a place where it feels that way, to remember that for a lot of people, this is a time that has fundamentally changed everything about their lives, and it will be quite a long time before they get back to that. And so I'm calling it the new abnormal, leading an estranged global landscape. And there's really no question. Let's see, now I can't get my slides to go forward. There we go. So a little bit about Hatch. So as Maura said, Hatch is a human analytics and change consultancy. We specialize in the future of work, and we are very busy right now working with mostly global clients, helping them understand what this means for their space, for their people, for their cultures. Obviously, remote work, a huge, I think, potential benefit, and something we've been trying to get businesses to do more of. And now the resistance to remote working has really had the back broken on that. And the opportunities that this presents are really exciting. The question is, what do we do with that? But Hatch is actually an acronym. It stands for Human Analytics Think Connect Hatch. And that's what we do. We're human analytics. We use evidence to understand how we can think, connect, and hatch new ideas. But it actually comes from this quote, which I think is really appropriate for right now, that says, you cannot go on indefinitely being an ordinary decent egg. We must be hatched or go bad. And I think we're really at a time, and especially if we look at the pandemic, but also Black Lives Matter, the tail end of Me Too, that there are so many things that are happening in sort of the constellation of the world that's influencing cultures, how we interact with each other, and that there come times in organizations' lives and our lives, in the sort of the timeline of nations and humanity, when you really get to a place where you either have to hatch, where you have to change, where you have to allow that new thing to happen, or you go bad. And I think we are very much in that place as humans. Anaïs Nin had another way of putting it. She said the pain it took to remain tight in a bud was greater than the pain it took to blossom. And I think that that's in some ways where we are as well, is this idea of, you'd see it as either hatching or blossoming, but we are going through, with the pandemic, a moment of truly existential change. And it creates a really unique opportunity. And my hope out of all of this is that we don't squander that opportunity, that in our speed to try to go back to what normal was, that we don't lose the opportunity to actually set everything back in a different way, and one that's more equitable, one that creates greater well-being, that has more autonomy for people, and that's just a better world than maybe the one that we were in. So as Maura said, I have a bit of a strange background, but it has informed the way that I operate. So as she said, I studied design in undergrad in the US. Then I went to study behavior, organizational behavior in Belfast. But in between, I was a homicide investigator for the Department of Justice. And I worked with men and women on Florida's death row to try to exonerate them, to get them off. And what I learned during that time is that the communities we surround ourselves have an impact. They have an impact on our mental health. They have an impact on the way that we behave, on the way that we react to each other. And what's really interesting is that until recently, our workplace was one of the biggest normative factors in our behavior, right? How people around us in our office acted. We spent more working time in our work environments than we did anywhere else. And now that's been taken away. So while that creates a stress, that also creates an opportunity. So what normative factors do we want to create? What culture do we want to create? And how is it that you do that outside, absent of a traditional work environment? And so that, what I learned from that time as a homicide investigator really informed the work that I do now. And it also has informed a strong sense of social justice in me, and something that I carry through the work that we do. So as I mentioned, this is a strange time, right? This is for my cheap laugh here. Our leader will be pleased that we brought that, their most valuable resource. I think we're over the hump now of hoarding toilet paper, but I mean, it really was a strange time, one has to admit. And we're still in a period, again, where it's not back to how it feels in a natural way. And it's very understandable that we want to be nostalgic for the good old days, right? We want to look back at a time before we were hoarding toilet paper or making sourdough bread or all of the things that we've been doing to keep ourselves occupied. And I think it's easy to fall victim to the nostalgia of good old days. And in fact, that's why, you know, there are a lot of political decisions that have been driven by this nostalgia for the good old days. So lest we forget the elephant in the room, let's talk a little bit about what the state of the workplace was before the pandemic, right? So this is just a few statistics that I think you might find intriguing. 85% of workers globally are not engaged in their work. This is from a Gallup study. They do this every few years. You've probably seen that before, but the bit that I think is most intriguing is out of those people, 18% of those disengaged employees actually seek to undermine their coworkers' success. So almost 20% of the people who say they're sleepwalking through their day are active saboteurs to their coworkers' success. That to me is terrifying. Now, if you go a little deeper, 2 of the 3 reasons people leave their job are culture and motivation. Number 1 being their boss. And so the question is, when we have this many people who are already unhappy about their work environment and how their working lives, if you have data from things like the Edelman Trust Barometer that's saying that we don't trust the people that that manage us, that work above us, and you've got lost productivity costing, you know, 6.5 trillion euro annually, the state of what we were before is not something we want to go back to. And so I think we want to see this rather than when do we get to go back to normal, to say, when do we get to create the new reality? And stop looking at what was before and rather try to really focus on what it is you want to create in the future, because that to me is the opportunity. So what is it that I think that some of the skills that we need to bring forward with us, leading in this new abnormal? 4 components that I'm calling unlearning, Kansui, wonder, and Meraki. Now, one of the things that whenever I talk about sort of management theory or leadership, I'm really keen to say I'm not a fan of what I consider sort of the shiny bauble leadership or management theory. I don't think you go, oh, follow this. This is the. I think that most of our understanding of how to lead and how to manage is evergreen. We're just not doing it well enough. And so some of this you might go, I sort of knew that. I'm just here to remind you. Some of it you may go, I hadn't considered it through that lens, or I hadn't thought of it that way. But I think a lot of this probably innately, if we are empathetic leaders, if we're listening to that little voice inside ourselves, we probably already know this stuff, but I'm hoping that maybe I just jog it a little bit and you leave here going, oh, okay, yes, that's right. Those are the things I need to consider. So the first is unlearning. I talk about this pretty much every chance I get. I have my little origami Yoda there because I just love origami Yoda. But Yoda said we must unlearn what you have learned. And what did he mean by that? What does he mean by unlearning? What do I mean by unlearning? I think that there are things that we know to be true, with sort of like a capital T, right? That we have to, that may actually be blocking our vision to new thinking. And that is really true in a time like this, when sort of all of our old way of doing things has been pushed away. So a little bit about neuropsychology and about neuroscience is that when our brains do something over and over and over again, it creates a neural pathway. And it's very much like a ski slope, like going down a ski slope. And you get caught in that rut of doing things the same way over and over again. Now, in order to sort of cover over the piste, so to speak, so that you can create these new pathways, you actually have to get rid of some of the way that you did things before. You have to sort of fill in those spaces where you used to head down the ski mountain. Now, the benefit of what we're doing right now is that we've been forced to recreate those neural pathways. And as an example, sort of the grandfather of change management, Carl Lewin, talks about change being thaw, reframe, refreeze. And usually it takes a really long time to thaw behavior. But the benefit of this pandemic is that we have been sort of thrust into a quick thaw, right? And so now we have the opportunity to reframe it in a different way. But I guess my message here, the idea of unlearning, is the reframing and the refreezing, right? Is that it's going to be very natural for us to want to slip back into our old habits. And so one of the things I would recommend to you is to look at what behaviors are you engaging in now that you really appreciate, that you don't want to lose, and actually write those down and say, these are the things I don't want to lose when we go back. Because those are going to be the things that's going to be very easy for them to just fall off the plate, and you're going back to those old neural pathways. You want to reframe and refreeze the things that matter to you, that you want to keep. The next is wonder, and this is actually, I'm writing a book about this, which is very exciting. Wonder is fascinating. It's the perfect commingling of curiosity and awe. Curiosity actually changes the chemistry of our brain. There was a study by UC Davis, and they found that when we were curious about something, it actually triggered dopamine. It was like a drug, right? So we wanted to know more, know more, know more. But what's really fascinating is that when we found the answer to the thing that we were curious about, it triggered the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of our brain that sets things into long-term memory. So what that means is that if you stay curious and follow those elements of curiosity through to their completion, then that information will stay with you longer. Now, the challenge is that there's really 2 different types of curiosity. There's epistemic curiosity, and then there's diversive. So what you want to avoid is sort of the kind of curiosity, it's like, let me Google that, let me Google that. I have a single question, let me try to find the answer. And really more look at kind of the curiosity that Einstein called holy curiosity, curiosity for curiosity's sense. And what that means is that just being open to the process of experiencing new things. And that's where awe comes in. So awe is a fascinating emotion. It is the only emotion that can be duly valenced, which means most emotions are either happy or sad, right? It's on one side or the other. So you're either positive or negative, but awe can be both. I mean, awe is the root word of awful and awesome, right? They're both the same. And so what's fascinating about awe is that when we experience awe, it creates two dynamics. The first is that we have a moment where we have a sense of feeling a small part of a larger component system. And in that, it means we feel more humble. It means that we want to be better members of our community. It means that we want to contribute more to the world. But then you have, so that's sort of what I call the wow, that bit where when you experience awe, you have this moment of, oh my goodness, I'm just this little part of this big system. But then the woe bit is where you have this transition that actually changes the lens through which you see the world. So a great example of this, if you're going, what is she going on about, is this idea of the overview effect. So when astronauts go into space, and for the first time see the planet Earth from space, it fundamentally changes them. And what's fascinating is the language that these astronauts use it's almost all the same. And these are serious military folk, right, that are going up, and they're coming back. I don't know if you may be unaware of this, but some of them come back and end up dedicating their life to sustainability, some of them to transcendental meditation, to the idea of being able to connect with the spirit world. So this fundamentally changes the lens through which people see the world. But the benefit is you don't just have to go into space to experience that. Even watching drone footage or listening to music in a darkened room, really, the beauty of awe is understanding what your awe archetype is. And so what is that thing that makes you go, oh, and that actually is scientifically, that's the sound we make when we experience awe, that sharp intake of breath. What is that thing that does that to you? Is that music? Is that art? Is that spoken word? Is that religion? Is that friendships or connectivity? Is that nature? And then allow yourself to spend time experiencing that, because in that, it makes us more able to manage stress, more resilient, and better members of our general community. The next is Meraki. I love the story that's associated with this. This is an image from The Art of the Brick. So some of you might have had a chance to see this. This is Lego brick artist Nathan Sawaya. But what a lot of people don't know about Sawaya is his story, how it is that he ended up doing the work that he does. So he was actually a lawyer in America. He spent his days lawyering, and then at the end of the day, he would go home and build Lego brick art. And on the weekends, Lego brick art, all the time, Lego brick art. And he realized that this was his purpose in life. Now, if you were to say to two people, well, what is your purpose? What's a better, higher, more meaningful purpose? Is it to be a Lego brick artist or an attorney? Most people would say, well, an attorney can have a bigger impact. But for him, he knew that this was his purpose. And so to me, it's the perfect description of what Meraki is. And Meraki is a Greek word that doesn't have a direct English translation, but it's really one part purpose, one part passion with a healthy sprinkling of grit. And what he did was take this idea of a purpose-driven life and then passionately deliver on it. Why does this matter now? Because the old systems are breaking. And in some way, thank God for that, right? The old systems are breaking, and the opportunity now is to live more purposefully, and in that, to create a better quality of life. We know that organizations that are more purpose-driven perform better. We know people who work for organizations where their individual purpose and the organization's purpose are aligned are happier and stay longer. And we know that individuals who understand their own purpose and deliver on it are able to have greater well-being. And so understanding this idea of purpose is not just a nice to have. But also it's really interesting because Edelman, who are big, if you're not familiar with them, big PR firm, said that 68% of individuals are making purchasing decisions based on a organization's statements on Black Lives Matter. 68%, that's a pretty big number of people. Dan Pink made a really great statement, the way that he described this link between purpose and profit. He said that when our purpose motive becomes unmoored from our profit motive, bad things happen. So think about that for a minute. What happens when your purpose motive and your individual profit motive become unmoored? It feels crappy, right? It's not a place you want to be. And so I think the first thing is to really understand what is your individual purpose, and how is it that you can deliver that, and how can you link that? How can you moor that as deeply as possible to this idea of a profit motive? And linking those two will become even more important, I believe, in the future. And then the last, this is something that is really, I think, a beautiful metaphor. You may not be familiar with Kansui. There's the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, which honors the idea of finding beauty in imperfection. And I think right now, of all times, it's really hard to feel a sense of peace. It's hard to see the beauty and all of the, I guess, the systems that are breaking, the world that is in pain in a lot of different ways. But this beautiful manifestation of how to find that beauty is Kansui. And what Kansui is taking broken pieces of pottery and mending them, but using a precious metal to highlight the fissures. I think this is a really beautiful metaphor, because one of the challenges we're dealing with right now is we're so quick to put it all back together. And again, I've already talked about why we don't want to put it back together the way that it used to be, right? That's not a place that we want to go back to. But we have to recognize that these places, the pressure that it has been built up in order to create the fissures in our systems, in our organizations, in our government, in ourselves, we want to remember what caused that, and we want to see where those elements fit back together again. But I think that we need to do that in a very slow, concerted way. And one of the challenges is that we just want to spackle over it. We want to stick it all back together and say, we're done. Okay, let's move on. But that is a really lost opportunity. And if you don't believe me, you can look at Daniel Kahneman, very clever guy, won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work in thinking fast and slow. But what he said is very simply, if there is time to reflect, slowing down is likely to be a good idea. And so a lot of times what we tend to do is say, I need to make a decision. I need to react. And especially in organizations right now, goodness, the number of phone calls I'm having with my clients where they're going, well, what do we do? And I'm like, you wait. No, but we need to do something. No, you wait. And just telling people to slow down, to not try to make decisions so quickly. There is a natural bias. And even when we look at leaders, we tend to have a bias thinking that leaders that react more quickly are better, even if the decisions they make are poor. And one of the challenges is we tend to make decisions quickly based on what we call instinct or intuition. But really, what instinct and intuition is pattern matching. So we're trying to match patterns to what we see and what we believe will be the right solution. But we can't pattern match to what it is that is happening right now. It's a falsity. And so we're thinking we can, and we're making decisions based on sets of assumptions that are erroneous. And so really one of the things that I want people to do is to just slow down, to take a minute to slow down. Now, why is this so important? Why are we trying to make decisions so quickly? It's a slide I use whenever I can, because I think it's really, really important. It's a very powerful way to understand why we behave the way that we do. So this is an emotional equation. This is from a book called Emotional Equations by a guy named Chip Conley. And Conley believed that if traditional mathematical equations were relationships between numbers, then what would be some relationships between words he could explore? And he picked anxiety because it was actually the second most common emotion felt by people in their work environments. The number one was boredom or malaise, which is not great. And he said, well, what is anxiety? What does it really equal? And he said, it's uncertainty times powerlessness. And I think this is interesting because it's not additive, it's multiplicative. So anytime uncertainty increases, anytime powerless increases, anxiety increases. Are we in a time of great uncertainty and a lot of powerlessness? Yeah, this is why you're feeling anxious, because you can't control anything and you don't know what the future holds. The reality is then what your brain does, it says, I'm then going to try to take control. So you take control by making a series of decisions, whether those are the right decisions or not. And you're trying to counteract this sense of anxiety, and anxiety is highly counterproductive. It's not able to be high performing. And I'm really, really annoyed at some of this, I don't know, productivity porn that's going around. Like, if you haven't learned a new language during this pandemic, then you're doing it wrong. No, there is no doing it wrong. This is a time when slowing down is fine. The challenge is that we need to find ways to exert our autonomy that don't involve making decisions. So whether that might be learning a hobby or even learning to let go, but autonomy and decision-making don't always need to be linked. And I think this is one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of bad management approaches and a lot of bad leadership right now, because people are just in such a hurry to make decisions. And so I guess that's sort of my final guidance, is that this idea of slowing down, that growth is slow, and that this is an opportunity for us to observe, to ruminate in what we're experiencing rather than feeling the need to move all the time. So I always end with a quote, because people are so much more clever and well-spoken than I am. And this is probably not one you thought would be on here. You probably didn't think we were going to be talking about rolling in ecstasy in a leadership discussion, but I love it because I think it's so appropriate for what we're going through right now. So you do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. Do not even listen, simply wait, be quiet, still, and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. And I think that this is just a wonderful sort of call to inaction. I usually like to end my presentations with a call to action. This is a call to inaction. So this is a group of doers. I know this is a group of people that want to do, that or want to achieve, that want to, what's the next benchmark? You know, tell me how to get there. What, put me in, coach. But this is actually the time to sit, to listen, to observe. Keep your powder dry. Keep your energy reserves stacked up, so that when the time is right, when you can see the world without anxiety, when you can see the world with some sense of certainty, then you can start to exert that power. Then you can start to make those business decisions. But for now, simply listen and wait, and the world will roll in ecstasy at your feet.